What's going on, y'all? Welcome back to the Country Central podcast. Just to kind of like backspace the timeline a little bit, Luke Combs put out his album Growing Up last year, I think in June of 2022. And it was a Luke Combs album. We liked it. It was fine. There were good songs. And the thing about the artwork was like it had half of his face and it showed this bar. And, a lot of us theorized that there would be a companion album the following year called Gettin' Old because he teased a song by that name, Growing Up and Getting Old, on TikTok. So it felt like a pretty sure bet. And the album, I think they announced Getting Old a month or two ago. And
hmm
I'll be really honest, like just speaking from my point of view, like I wasn't like overly hyped. I mean, Luke Combs has been like one of the dominant stars in country music for a couple of years now. And to coin the phrase, like I felt like, oh, what you see is what you get a little bit. Like the album comes out, there are nice songs, they're not like groundbreaking. And I'm like, okay, I'll listen to it when it comes out. And like I really didn't have that date like stuck in my mind, like get hype, like freaking March 24th, the new Luke Combs album comes out.
Right.
But it came out and I was like, okay, let's cue this thing up. And so I put it on, and that title track, Grown Up and Getting Old, it was good. And then I heard Hannah Ford Road, and I was like, dang, this is like kind of a barn burner. This is like old school Southern rock vibes. Like, it's creative. It's like, it's not a lifestyle song by any stretch, but it's a banger. Goodness gracious. And then I kept listening, and I heard You Found Yours, which was like, really hard hitting. There was a lot of feeling. The Telecaster was strong. And I kept going from like one song to another, and I was like, oh my gosh, what? And like I was halfway through and I texted the Country Central group chat and I was like, guys, this Luke Combs album is not like other Luke Combs albums. This is a special freaking record. And I got right through it and like, yeah, not every single song was like, whoa. But on the whole, I was like, dang, this is a 9 out of 10 at least. Like this is a special album. There were 18 songs. I had a good time like looking at some of the credits on these, like a few folks that I know, like Rob Williford, his guitar player, and Ray Fulcher, who has been on this podcast before. Like they had great cuts. And I don't know, there was just something like really special and intangible about this album. It was like he tapped into a different part of himself creatively. Like the songs sound good as all Luke Combs songs do. They sound very country, very twangy. He still has one of the best voices like in all of country music, like perhaps ever. He just belts like nobody else and like sincere as anybody could be. But like the quality of these songs, I feel like has like really, really leveled up. So that's kind of my preface. I've got Brandon with me, and we're gonna dig into a lot of these songs and our favorites, and also just like what this album like means for country music broadly right now. Because truly, I feel like this is an opus. This is a special album, and I couldn't be more excited to talk about it.
Yeah, I definitely agree with you, Jack. I mean, this is a really special album because I don't think we really saw this coming. Like, yeah, we thought that there was going to be kind of like a part two to this. We saw the album covers. And I remember when the first one came out for Growing Up, I was like, this is a weird cover. Like, why is half of his face on this? And, it's almost like, I guess you could say almost like the double album that never was, because it's not really a double album. But the first one was we weren't, we talked about this. The first album we weren't blown away with Growing Up. We weren't blown away with it. We thought it was good quality content songs, but there wasn't anything different than his previous records. So that's where I thought the first. I'm saying the first one in terms of the first of both of these two albums. The first one kind of fell flat in my sense. I mean, there were some good songs on there. There wasn't anything that was like terrible, but in terms of the album being called Growing Up, there weren't a lot of songs that I felt really embodied that. I mean, besides a couple maybe like Used to Wish I Was, which is probably my favorite on that album. And maybe like Any Given Friday Night, he kind of looks back on
Jam, yeah.
he looks back on like his younger days and everything like that. But Getting Old, I feel like is such a trailblazer. I mean, this one I was really looking forward to. And like I said, they only gave this, I think we talked about this, like, I think like 2 months of like a heads up, like, yep, new record out, like coming out in March. Like we had no idea like this was even coming. We did a couple reviews on this past week with the singles that came out, but I have to tell you, I'm a huge fan of Hannaford Road, like you had just mentioned. That one's a banger. I think that's one of the highlights of the album. And my other favorite on here is Back 40 Back. I thought that one was such like a tear jerker. I actually did like tear up a little bit listening to that because he talks about how small town roots turn into like bigger cities and you're never going to get like those times and those memories back. And I think it's something like everyone can kind of relate to. I mean, I don't know about the people who have grown up in cities, but the people who have grown up in like small towns such as mine, I come from Connecticut, so not really country as one might think, but I grew up from a really rural town, so I actually like really resonated with this track, and I thought that was one of the highlights of the album. And guys, I mean, the cover of Fast Car, this is
Yes,
his.
yes. Let's
We got
go.
we got to
Let's
talk about this one too because this was teased for a little bit, and we're like, wow, he's finally going to release this cover of Fast Car, which is covered by which she covered by Tracy Chapman, and I have to say, guys, I mean, the vocals on this track, like these are some of the smoothest vocals I've ever heard from Luke. And with Luke, we're known to hearing like boisterous, loud tracks, like a little bit of raspiness, which is not a bad thing on his end either because he has really great inflection with his tone and his voice. But the smooth vocals on Fast Car, I mean, I honestly wouldn't be shocked if they're like, hey, have a couple sips of whiskey before you get on recording this because it was so smooth and the inflection on this track is incredible. I mean, he really took this song and made it his own. And you hear the words and the lyrics that much more prominently than you do in the original version. And I'm a huge fan of the original version too. But when you hear like his version, you're like, wow, like I'm understanding the lyrics, I'm understanding the story more. And it's almost like it's not a cover. It's like you listen to it and you're thinking like this is kind of like something like he would write. He would write something like this. So that's why it just made it all that more fitting. So I just want to point out just a few of those things. I know Jack's going to touch on a couple things, and we're going to kind of go play, this little back and we're going to go discuss more about this back and forth with him in the game versus Morgan. But I'm going to turn over to Jack, and you can kind of go off on that with, especially with Fast Car.
Yeah, I appreciate that because Fast Car was something that I was looking forward to. I'm a fan of that song. And it was very, very different, of course, like that goes without saying. But like you said, it did work and it worked in a weird way because like Luke Combs and Tracy Chapman are two artists who have very, very little in common. Like,
Yeah.
but definitionally, like Luke Combs is a singer songwriter, but I wouldn't consider him like a singer songwriter. Like as a genre, that's
Mm.
Tracy Chapman's bag. Like she was a South African activist. Like that's her world is just like simple acoustic storytelling, blah blah blah. And that's not Luke Combs' thing at all. But that said, like it was like he put on a character and in a lot of different ways. I'll discuss what I mean here. Like melodically, it was nothing like he's done before. Like just simple soft flow. Like even like Luke Combs' ballads, like there's always a grittiness to them. You know what I mean? There's always
Mm.
a guy's guy type of vibe. Like even like Forever After All or Better Together. Like they're tender but they're manly. And it feels like this was like a little bit different. He was wearing a character. It almost reminded me of Taylor Swift and Betty when she was playing this
Yeah.
character James, you know what I mean? And
Yeah.
James is like confessing that he cheated on Betty. Like
Mhm.
this was kind of like that. Like Luke Combs is a checkout girl, but like he wore the hat well. Like he got into character, and like you could tell it was him. It was him telling the story, but like he knew what the song needed. He absolutely crushed the flow in the verses, and like because you could imagine this being like a rougher performance, but he didn't
Mhm.
do that. He absolutely nailed that. And like I'm seeing like we're definitely not alone on this point. I just checked the iTunes charts before we hopped on this podcast, and the Fast Car cover is literally number 3, like overall all
Yeah.
genre. It's Last Night, Flowers by Miley Cyrus, and Fast Car by Luke Combs. And if that's not like the most unlikely thing, like come on. So that said, I mean that was a highlight for me personally. But I feel like I'm not really like doing the record justice if I just like rave about the one cover song that everybody's talking about, because I want to zero in on my favorite song before we get any farther, and that's Where the Wild Things Are. this was a song. Like up to
Yeah.
this point, my favorite song of the year was "Watching the Fire Burn" by Nicholas Jamerson because I'm a snob. But man, I believe somebody said that this was Luke's like first outside cut that he's done, and it's powerful. I don't have a lot of words, but like the narrative is compelling. It's clever. I mean, it's especially spoke to me as an older brother. And just everything about it like just punches you in the gut. The build at the end, the guitars are like really clever, like from a production standpoint. Like I always love it when rhythm guitar like kind of throws you for a loop, and it's not just chords and it's not just strumming. Like I'm a guitar player and I love a good solo, but a really clever like rhythm guitar is exceptionally fun too. And like the whole thing built with the emotion, like there's not a lot that I can really say to do it justice. Like I'm not gonna like go too deep into it, but suffice to say, this is my favorite song of the year. It's my favorite song Luke Combs has ever cut, and yeah, it's powerful. I mean, it's about brotherhood, and yeah,
Yeah.
you feel it.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that song in particular too. And to be honest, I was a little nervous because I'm like, oh, he's got like two outside cuts on this because he released the whole track listing, I think, I don't know, maybe a month and a half ago before the album came out. And I was like, wow, like this is really interesting because this is the first time he's ever had outside cuts on his albums. Luke has co-written every song on all of his albums to date. So I was like, this is kind of interesting. So it kind of struck a chord with me like, not I don't want to say laziness, but I'm like, is he starting to become one of those artists
There's a
that
stigma
like
there. I
picks
agree.
more of his songs and like doesn't put as much effort into things? And that's kind of where I was going with it. I think that's safe to say that I'm wrong about that because I think he's very particular about what songs he wants on his album. I mean, these are only two outside cuts out of I mean, what the 18 that are on there. So, I mean, is it something like Morgan? No, we've known Morgan for having half, maybe more than half of outside cuts being on his album. So, I don't think Luke is going in that direction per se. I do think the only thing I have to say about this album, and it's not even about the songs, it's the artwork. I'm a little disappointed with, and I guess the last one too, but I just have to say it because all of Luke's albums have never been like a real image of him. They've always been like his first album. I think it was like stained glass looking. His first album was I don't know some type of caricature like animation, and like both of these past two covers, it's like I feel like it's kind of it like gets closer each album to like a real image of Luke. But honestly, like I think I would have liked to see maybe like a different color, maybe like something like black and white or something, like a little more authentic. I know people tend to go black, artists will tend to go black and white when they want something more authentic that's put out. I don't know if this was that personal to have a black and white tone, but I'm hoping that one of these days he releases an album cover where it's his actual face or his actual body. But I just think some of the artwork is just a little gaudy. But I do understand the correlation with both the albums with having half of his face on it. But I just wanted to point that out there. So I don't know if you have anything to say about that, Jack.
Yeah,
But
no, there's something there. Yeah, for sure. See, my thing on that is like I like the sketchiness of it, and I like the neon. Even I feel like neon is
interesting.
overused. Like in every possible
Yeah.
sense, neon is overused in country music. Country artists love to sing about neon. I mean, a lot of these album artworks have like neon in them. I mean, and it's cool. I get it. It's like a vibey, like night kind of thing. But I mean, honest to God, there's not enough neon in the world for the amount of neon that's sang about in country music. Like, that's just the truth. But I think that this was done tastefully. I especially like the fact that he got back to, I mean, between these two albums, the old Luke Combs like logo. And I know like logos aren't a big
Right.
deal, but the thing that they were doing and what you see is what you get. Like you can say that this is ugly, but that was really ugly.
Yeah.
Like like
I definitely agree with you on that. Yeah.
yeah. So I thought it was fine. I mean, obviously the duality between the bar and the house. I mean,
Yeah.
there's something there as far as like the two themes of the
And
record.
I definitely appreciate that. Yeah. With
Yeah,
the
yeah,
duality, exactly.
yeah, sure. So, I mean, that said, I think you brought up a really interesting point that segues into where I really wanted to take this conversation. That Morgan Wallen had a good number of outside cuts on his 36 song monstrosity.
Yeah.
Um, there were 14 of them to be exact. No, 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 no. Actually, it was the opposite. He only wrote
Oh,
14 songs.
14.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. He only wrote 14 songs on the 36 song One Thing at a Time. And like, I'm not a snob when it comes to outside cuts. Tim McGraw has some of the best country songs ever. He
Hmm.
didn't write anything. Kenny Chesney, I mean, he didn't write
Yeah,
anything.
Kenny Chesney's huge for that. Yeah.
Yeah, and these people have reputations for just picking really good songs and lifting good people up. And Christina made a good point about that when it came to Wallen. But this is I think the difference, that the Wallen songs that he picked were not necessarily special songs. There were some standouts, but these were not whoa songs. And
Right.
I gotta tell you, whether they wrote it or not, getting to hear this album of Luke songs where every song almost was a whoa song, it was a big, big difference maker. And I do want to talk about like the state of country music as far as like the Luke versus Wallen debate.
Yeah, and like, and that's the thing too is, and I know our our episode tonight is, today is focused on primarily talking about Luke's album, but that's the thing with Morgan's album for me is that when there was that first announcement of it being 36 songs, I was like, there's no way all these can be great. I mean, like, look, if you get a project like that, maybe you're lucky if maybe 75% of the songs are like all bangers, like they're all standout songs. But I mean, when you get something like 36, you just already know there's going to be like a bunch of fillers on that, and that's my thing, is that I don't know how far like having all these tracks on a record can go. So that's why I really applaud Luke for having standout songs on this album. This album is definitely a massive step up than his previous one released in June, so I do agree with that. But yeah, as far as him, and I've always been a huge Luke fan. I really have, and I haven't cared for Morgan as much, so I don't want to come from a biased standpoint. But I think Luke does step it up here, and I know there's been like this back and forth with Luke and Wallen, and I think Luke has pretty much re-cemented himself in the game, because there was a little bit of time, especially towards the end of 2022, where I was like, I don't know about that album he put out in June. I'm like, I don't know where this really like leaves him. And when he made this announcement about Getting Old coming out, I was like, I don't think he's getting irrelevant, but maybe his team or the label thinks that like he's not in the game as much as he used to be, and maybe they're doing this as like a last ditch resort to be like, hey, we know like Wallen might have something coming out soon, like let's get some work out. I don't know if that's the case or not, but you definitely see the back and forth push from either side. But I have to stand with Luke on this because all of his songs are so authentic. I mean, with this one, he wrote minus two outside tracks. He wrote everything else. So I applaud him for that. And all these songs are pretty much standout tracks. So I think there's more to do with quality than quantity.
Yeah, so I'm with you. I think it's funny between the three of us, myself, yourself, and Christina. Like we've always been on like kind of different sides of the Morgan spectrum. Like Brandon is not a Morgan guy, and he's been pretty upfront about that. And I kind of like toe the line a little bit. Like I'm not afraid to criticize him at all, but generally, I like him. He doesn't offend me much. And Christina is like all in, like super Morgan fan. Like that's kind of like where we lie on this. But over the last like 4 years or so, and you've probably heard this if you listen to the podcast a little bit, you've heard my viewpoints on this, where I have believed for some time that Morgan Wallen, between the two, as long as they've been vying for like the top spot in country music, I have believed that Morgan Wallen is the more interesting, more creative, more unique star. I mean, what you see is what you get is my mantra for Luke Combs, or has been for the longest time. And I've been like, okay, like when Luke puts out something, like we know what it's going to be. It's just going to be Luke Combs. And like with Dangerous, like I liked being thrown for a loop with Morgan. We've talked way too much on this podcast about how like standing out and being authentic and being unique and how important those things are. So in that respect, like Morgan has always been like my guy a little bit. Like I like Luke, but I like I like the intrigue that Morgan has given country music over the last little while, and just the artistic versatility that he's had, like playing in different genres and whatnot. But last Friday night, when the Luke album came out, like I officially switched teams, and it wasn't even like a tough decision for me, because one thing at a time teed this up for Luke Combs to come in and like do what he did.
Yeah.
Like we've like I said, for years I believe that Morgan Wallen was the more versatile of the two artists. But when he put out this album of 36 songs, like that didn't have a lot of standouts, like if we talk about percentages, like what's 8 songs of 36? Is that like less than 25%?
Yeah.
I mean, and I know Morgan Wallen fans are gonna be like, no, they're all bangers. They're not all bangers. Shut up.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's like it. When Luke Combs put this out, like I didn't even know it, like in my soul at the time, but I was waiting. I was ready for somebody to usurp that throne. And Morgan Wallen, I think commercially, he has like solidified his place. Like as far as like who's the biggest artist, like it's not a debate between him and Luke anymore, really. But who's the best dominant stadium level country artist? It's Luke Combs. He has
Yeah.
proven it. He has
Yeah.
shown how creative he can be. He has like embraced this squad of Randy Montana and Dan Isbell and Jonathan
Yeah.
Singleton and Ray Fulcher and all of these dudes. They have made him better. He has made himself better. He has become like more creative than I could have imagined. And I am proud to announce that I am Team Luke all the way. And Luke Combs, I am sorry for calling you boring.
I love it, Jack. And and I'm there with you, like, especially when you were talking about the commercial aspect with Wallen. That's 100% true. He's definitely cemented that. I mean, all of his stuff sells. I mean, he's broken records with his last album. There's no doubt about that. And I will testify. I will attest to that being true. But yeah, everything about being with Luke, just with the writers, like working with these people, like making these standout hits, and just like getting those fans in. The fans have always been there all along. Like they know what kind of work he's gonna do. We've talked about authenticity, and I think he's one of the artists that really still holds true to that to this day. I mean, Luke's been in the game for what, 7, 8, almost 8 years now. So I mean, I think there's some really big consistency that's been there. So I definitely agree with that.
Yeah, certainly. I want to get into the singles a little bit because I mean, as we discuss this right now, "Going, Going, Gone" from the last record is what it was just number one like a little bit ago.
Hmm.
Like it just like enjoyed its time like at the top of the charts. And as it stands right now, uniquely enough, he put out a really long album and there has yet to be a single from it. And I mean, that's kind of a consequence of like, releasing two albums like so close together where I mean, from a singles perspective, like growing up probably had a little more juice in it. But that said, I really want to get into this. Like, what are the singles on Getting Old? Like, which ones can we look for on the radio?
Yeah, well, I guess they put, and correct me if I'm wrong. I think "Love You Anyway" was released as the first single.
Oh, was it? Okay.
Yeah, so I think "Love You Anyway" was put out as the first single back in February. I don't even know how much airplay that's really gotten, but I think that's been put
Yeah,
out
with
as,
Going, Going, Gone being what it was. I mean,
yeah. And that's the thing. Like, going, going, gone. I honestly feel like that had a little more longevity to it, but I think that, I mean, and like we just said, I think it just hit number one. I think it was last week that it just hit number one, at least on Billboard Country Airplay when I last checked. So I think it could have had a little more longevity, but since this album has just come up on Friday, I think they're kind of gearing up for the next one. So I think "Love You Anyway" is probably going to be like the next radio hit for him off of this one. I would love to see, I know we talked about Hannaford Road. I would love to see that one be a single. I think Back 40 Back has a lot of potential, but I think,
yeah,
I
yeah.
think Where the Wild Things Are would probably be the best bet.
See, here's the thing. Excuse me. Where the Wild Things Are will not be a single.
You don't think?
I don't believe it.
No?
And there are like two reasons that I have. One of them is it's just the best song, and the best song isn't going to be the single. But the other reason is that the second verse does not have a chorus. Like you hear the
That's
chorus,
right.
and then it goes into the second verse, and then like instead of a second chorus, it's just a guitar solo, and then before you know it, like you're pounding away in the bridge, and like
Hmm.
you're all on your feels and blah blah blah. So like I just there are so many songs that are like they're not bad at all. This is a good album, but they are like by the book a little bit. I don't think that like the one song that's like whoa, that's weird, that's different. Like from a like song construction formula perspective, I don't think that they're going to rock the boat in that respect. Um, for me, I think Five Leaf Clover has a real shot. It's
I
been
was
like
actually just about to say that one too. Yeah.
yeah, like it's been like a buzzy song from a social media
Hmm.
standpoint. I think that this is one of the ones that fans have been asking for a little while. And like it was an instant grad track. Like that doesn't always mean something, but it was one of the songs that they chose to like push forward in the promo process. I think that means something. And I'll be really honest. My bet is probably Fast Car, like as the next one, just because it's got
Really?
so much traction right now.
Yeah. It has a lot. It
Like
does.
like I think Luke is signed to Sony, so he's not signed to like Big Loud or one of these labels that like we point at as like cool and subversive and different all the time. But this is a pragmatic move, and like following the buzz when it comes to social media and like streaming and all of that is just something you have to do. And like I said, like Luke Combs, he's signed to a major label that's not as flexible necessarily, and maybe "Love You Anyway" will be the song. It wasn't one of my like favorites, but it's still a good song.
I
But
agree.
yeah, go.
And I honestly, I totally forgot about Five Leaf Clover until you mentioned it, and I think that would be actually a good one to be the next single because it's almost it's kind of reminiscent to me of doing this. It's
Yeah,
talking about
yeah,
it's just very like it's very reflective, and it's he talks about how lucky he is to have his lifestyle and everything like that, and it's a little bit of like the other side of doing this. So I feel like the duality is pretty good with that too. Um, I would be shocked if Fast Car was released as a single. I'm not saying I would be opposed to
yeah.
it
I
because
would too.
I think it would be like a great move for the label to do. I mean, it's definitely. I mean, we just looked
It's the
at the
buzzy
charts. I
one.
mean,
It has
it's the
yeah, it's
buzzy one.
buzz.
It's up there on the
Yeah,
charts. I mean, like I wouldn't be shocked that there would be no doubt in my mind that that single would do well. I would just be shocked that they would be like releasing a cover. But I think I was thinking also about Tattoo and a Sunburn, but I think Tattoo and a Sunburn is a little more of what we've known for him to be. So I don't think it
yeah,
really stands out that much. I mean, like I think it would be a great radio ready single, but I don't think it has the potential like the other couple songs that we had just mentioned.
yeah. I get that. See, I think you made a really good point that like gratitude and like being happy with his life has always been like a big theme, and it's a thing in country music like
Hmm.
broadly. But it's always been a Luke Combs thing.
Yeah.
So in that respect, like five leaf clover makes a lot of sense. Like there is that like doing this energy, but it's not like an if, it's a here I am and this is awesome
Right.
type of thing.
Right.
But man, like they have options. That's like what we're talking about here. Like there are a lot of different routes they could go,
They
and
have
they
a
all
lot.
kind of make sense. Yeah, like this could be, even though it's not as long as Dangerous was, this could be one of those albums where they
Mhm.
string it out for like 2 3 years and pump like 5 6 singles out of it. Mhm.
I think they could easily 4 or 5 singles. I think they could get out of this. I just hope this is not like a Kelsey Ballerini bust because with her last album, Subject to Change, didn't have a great lead single, and the
Yeah.
follow up, I was like, "There's so many other options. Like,
Well,
why
that
did they
one's not
go with
done yet. I mean,
yeah?" And, no, and, right, and
half of the
it's
hometown took
not
years to hit. Like,
right. It's not done yet, but I just don't want it to be like set up for failure. Where like there's so many other good options. Like, don't choose something that's like lackluster. But
that makes you yeah. But anyway, y'all, we appreciate you hanging out with us. We hope you dug this album as much as we did. big fans of Luke and his whole team and what they put out here. But we encourage you to hit us up all week long on social media at Country Central on Instagram. You can follow the pod too at Country Central Pod. Check out the reels and like all the best moments from this podcast. Check out the camo Country Central hat at countrycentralshop.com. And until next time, we'll catch you real soon with another episode.